Okay, preparing. All right, here we go. Hello and welcome to everyone joining. There's something satisfying around seeing the attendees flood in. It's like when you show up at a protest and everyone, it's like peak time. All right, welcome, y'all. Tell us where you're joining. Share your thoughts on how you're feeling in the chat. Where you're joining from. Just want to go ahead and welcome folks. We'll get started in a few minutes. Hope y'all are cozy wherever you may be. All right, we got people from Belgium, Arizona, Oregon, Mexico. And if y'all already are coming with questions, feel free to put it in the chat. Folks joining, take these 2 minutes to ping your friends, your allies, let them join, tell them it's getting started. Feel free to share this link and the YouTube link. All right, y'all, we'll get started in about 1 minute. How are folks feeling tonight, today? It's 7 o'clock my time, so still sun is shining somewhere. Sun in LA. Our government might be shutting down out here in the US any minute now. How timely. All right, y'all, welcome. My name is Rasha Mubarak. I use she, her pronouns. I am your MC for tonight. Welcome to webinar 2 from Cop City to Palestine. As promised, we are having a deeper dive into prison imperialism, new and old tactics of fascism. We're going to explore a deeper dive into the US carceral system and prison imperialism. Of course, emphasizing the connections to the struggles of the Palestinian people, and we will be uplifting the effects and impacts of these assaults on human rights, including on how mass incarceration is used to repress and control groups of people. Y'all got to hear from our partners, Sami Doon and Black Alliance for Peace. They're here with us again. And of course, Camille from Alliance for Global Justice. But we wanted to be more intentional and give you all even more information. So we'll be having presentations for the first 10 minutes. And I'm excited to introduce our first presenter, speaker, Tanya Nunez, who is an AFGJ program coordinator, filmmaker, multimedia journalist, and community organizer based in Arizona. She grew up on both sides of the US-Mexico border and consequently got involved in activism and political work around immigrant rights and against border militarization. Since then, she has been involved in different working class struggles, such as against police brutality and landlord abuse, and supporting anti-war, anti-imperialist movements. Y'all welcome Tanya Nunez.
Hi everybody. Nice to be here in this webinar with all you guys. And yeah, I'm based in Tucson, Arizona. And like Rasha said, I work with the Alliance for Global Justice. And my presentation, I'm basically just going to give a general overview of what imperialism is. And, because basically all this oppression we see is rooted in imperialism, and also give a brief overview on prison imperialism, which is an extension of imperialism that we specifically in the Alliance for Global Justice focus on and work on. And so I'll give a brief overview about what that is. And so I'm guessing maybe many of us who are on here do have an idea of what imperialism is, but just again, to give a brief overview, there's a lot of definitions that go around there, but I think it's important to understand that us at the Alliance for Global Justice, and I assume the rest of the organizations here, it's a very particular description, and it's not necessarily connected to a policy choice of a government. Imperialism isn't just like a policy choice. It's a system. It's a system that it's a particular stage in the capitalist system. And Vladimir Lenin, who is a Russian revolutionary, he sort of kind of is one of the one who has contributed a lot to the concept of imperialism, writing The Highest Stage of Imperialism. He refers it as the highest stage in the development of capitalism, meaning there's no separating imperialism from capitalism. That is, it's one or the other. Basically, imperialism is a stage in capitalism. And so what's important to know about capitalism is that since its inception, it's been a violent process. It's been a violent system. Since its birth, it's used legal and extra-legal violence to accumulate wealth in the hands of the capitalist class through a process called primary accumulation. And within England, one of the capitalism's first acts was expropriation, like where it was born. One of the first acts was expropriating peasants from their land, forcibly converting them into wage laborers and transferring their means of subsistence into commodities they had to purchase. And such dispossession was carried out by state individual terrorism. And we've seen that, of course, too, in the colonized world, that developed in the colonized world, them suffering the same fate in a much, sharper sense. And again, going back to Lenin, to go back to how imperialism plays into this, the particular distinction between imperialism and capitalism, and that he writes, is that economically, the main thing in this process is that displacement of capitalist free competition is a displacement of capitalist free competition by capitalist monopoly. So gone are the brief days when small businesses competed with each other in limited markets. Instead, the capital is centralized in fewer and fewer hands. And so capitalism, as he quoted, it's one of my, kind of all-time favorite quotes, is capitalism has grown into a world system of colonial oppression and of the financial strangulation of the overwhelming majority of the population of the world by a handful of advanced countries. Their booty accrues to a handful of imperialist powers who are drawing the whole world into their war over the division of their booty. And so we see this play out nowadays with endless war, right? The US is constantly involved in war, and that is to divide this booty that they, have. To keep accumulating resources and keep accumulating land. And so yeah, that's kind of a brief overview of what imperialism is. And so countries, governments of different countries, act in the interest of, the centrally organized monopolies that now, have a hold of the, financial system of the economy. And, again, the tendency is for war. And that's like just a reflection of capitalism. Like war is always gonna, happen because, they need to conquer new markets and resources, and they need to continue expanding economically. And so, the imperialist countries does this through many different means, obviously, repressing. And as we will be, as the other presenters will be talking further, they do this through many different means. And they need to, keep nations oppress different nations that are resisting, that are a threat to imperialism, to keep their control, to keep US hegemony. And so, and that's the case in the Middle East, right, in Central Asia. It's a very geostrategic area for the US ever since it became like the main power following World War II. Its objective has been to dominate the Middle East because it's a resource-rich and strategically key area, because it's basically at the crossroads of the world. And we could talk more in deeper depth about the details of that, but we could that would be a very long talk. And so since my presentation's short, I'm going to keep it short. But yeah, I mean, part of this too is because, and the US uses this through Israel, right? Israel functions as the imperialist watchdog of the Middle East. It's like the local enforcer or subcontractor for global imperialism for the US. Its specific task is to guard against the emergence of revolutionary Arab nationalism, but it also provides many other useful services for US imperialism. And in exchange for these valuable contributions to imperial control of the Middle East, the United States generally subsidizes the Israeli economy, in appreciation for its faithful support for US imperialism. And so it does this through primarily military aid. You will probably know that Israel is the biggest receiver of foreign aid, with receiving up to this date about $150 billion in aid, and that's almost about at this point about 4 billion a year, 3.9 billion, and actually it's 158 billion in bilateral aid that the Israel has received up to this date. And again, most of it is military assistance, but also they do this through prisons, right? And so that's how I'll get to the point about prisons are one of the tactics the US essentially uses, imperialism uses to keep enforcing their US hegemony around the world. And the US does this by spreading its model of mass incarceration around the world. I mean, we know that the US is, the largest, where it has the largest population of people incarcerated in the world. And so the US government is also involved in the prison systems of at least 40 different countries, mainly the majority being non-white and developing nations. And these programs involve the construction of new prisons, prison guard training, accreditation, data management, and overall design. And then the common features of these prisons that the US structured, they include features like overcrowding, neglect of healthcare, the use of torture, and extreme and punitive isolation, transfer of prisoners far away from their families and communities, severe restrictions on visits, including by their legal defenders, and prison militarization in different forms. And so this funding is provided mainly as part of the war on drugs and the war on terror. And I mean, we could see this reflected again in Palestine and the Middle East, and also in Latin America, with the US exporting its prison system over there. And I mean, as others in this webinar will talk further, Palestinians have experience, have knowledge of prisons, and it parallels what Black people in the US experience in prisons. And over since 1948, 1 million Palestinians have been arrested, which constitutes almost 20% of the Palestinian population and 40% of the male population. And that includes nonviolent acts, which they've been penalized, and even things like writing something on Facebook or posting a picture of a relative who was killed on Facebook. That's been one case. And so but there's other reasons why people might get arrested, and that is participating without a permit in a demonstration of more than 10 people, that could be construed as political, waving flags or taking part in vigils without approval, belonging to an organization that Israel designates as illegal, including groups that make up the Palestine Liberation Organization, and like I said, posting social media messages critical of Israel and forces of the occupation. And so we could see a lot of parallels again with the US prison system and the Israeli prison system, also in the commercial interest, right? Both of them are laced in commercial interest, and a lot of private companies profit off of prisoners, of the prison system. And in Israel in 2013, the Who Profits Research Center said that about 22 corporations profited off of prisons. And in the US, it's roughly 4,000 private corporations who profit off of the prisons here. And the US, how the US is involved in prisons in Palestine is mostly through the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs. You could, look at them and see that, they have all these programs that have trained the Palestinian Authority on different things. They've trained prisoners, they've trained prosecutors. And so, I don't know how many minutes I have left. I know I have 5 minutes, but.
Thank you so much, Tanya.
Yeah. It's a very general rundown, but basically it all comes down that the US needs to keep repressing people and keep people divided. They need to keep the Palestinian people divided. They need to keep the Arab world divided so they could keep control of their land and their territory and the resources. And so we need to find ways how we could fight that back, those tactics, because they're not going to change. They're not going to, it's part of the imperialist system. It's inherent to the imperialist system. So we need to fight back, instead of waiting for them to liberate us or, change their policies or reform. So yeah, that's all I got to say. And tune in, because we're actually going to write a more comprehensive article about the relationships of, prison imperialism in relation to Cop City and to Palestine. So stay tuned for that.
Thank you so much, Tanya. That was a packed presentation considering your time. So thank you so much. Super helpful. And if you all have questions for Tanya, please stick around. She'll be here for the end of the Q&A portion. I'm going to do a little talk on Palestine, just because we're all here in light of Palestine continually being exceptionalized within this work, whether it's the right wing or so-called progressives. Palestine is an issue that somehow continues to be an accepted, exceptionalized position. While it feels like we are living in dark times, this is not new. Tactics of fascism, but what will forever define who we are as residents of this country, citizens of this world, and humans on this earth is how we show up. Since 1967, well over 800,000 Palestinians, including children as young as 12, have been arrested and detained under Israel's settler colonial regime. Palestinians are subjected, as you all know, living under occupation and oppression, long detention. You'll hear a lot from Charlotte today on Palestinian prisoners. and their struggle for freedom and their steadfastness. Samidun that's what actually the word Samidun means in Arabic, is steadfastness. So Palestinians, because of their fight for liberation and freedom, are often not only politicized for their identity, but for their struggle for freedom and liberation. Mass incarceration, as we know, serves as a purpose. Mass incarceration within the US is meant to debilitize Black and Brown communities. Mass incarceration in Israel is meant to quell the voices of Palestinians who are peacefully protesting their opposition on their continuation of living under occupation, and they're living under this settler colonial regime every single day. Mass incarceration, as we know, is a tool to not only silence, but further criminalize Black and Brown folks within the US and outside the US, and specifically in Palestine. Being able to have the ability to run a PR system that can falsely label Palestinians as a collective security threat is also a stunt. This is how Israel continues to be able to advance their oppression on a people. This carceral regime continues to affect Palestinian lives every single day. Going back to mass incarceration, it's not because they believe that a 12-year-old Palestinian boy actually threw a rock at an Israeli military tank, right? Detaining him at 3 o'clock in the morning is meant to shatter the dreams of this Palestinian boy, to make him feel less worthy than them, to make him feel that he is not worthy of pursuing education, pursuing his wildest dreams. These are all part of systems to dehumanize the Palestinian people, to disenchant the Palestinian people. As Palestinians, as Palestinian activists, as human rights activists, advocates, we understand that only when we uplift and center the connections between the Palestinian rights and struggles for Indigenous, Black, and Brown communities and other marginalized groups impacted by US-Israeli policies within the US and outside the US borders, is when we will all rise, when we will all be free of persecution, and when we will all breathe liberation. Why have we accepted the assumption that freedom for one people comes at the expense of another? Why? We're here tonight because AFGJ refuses to do that. There is a global divide today between those who believe in freedom and equality for all, that is inclusive of Palestinians, and those who justify racial and religious supremacy. While every struggle for freedom from Palestine to the US is unique, it is our values that will continue to bring us together. Right-wing, repressive, anti-democratic governments, imperialists, fascists, it's not new. But there is a rise. How it's accepted within this world. We all know that colonialism is the practice of how a foreign government continues to exercise control over a group of people. These feels like debilitating times. AFGJ has continuously been deplatformed. But what I'll share with you is that this is a moment of crisis for rights globally that presents an opportunity for us here to build a stronger movement for justice. Right now, the reason why they come and try these repression campaigns, character assassination, deplatforming is because they see this collective power. As humans, as people of conscience, we need to lead the shift towards rights-based making sure, sorry, my phone's going up, rights-based rights, that includes Palestine. When we center equality and freedom and justice across the board, that is when we are able to continue this work. What we are witnessing is a people's movements around the world. On the other side of the coin, that we're witnessing that people here, all of you in this Zoom chat, AFGJ, Sami Dune, BAP, our allies, is that the world is powerfully connecting the dots between the shared struggles against fascism, racism, and oppression, and are aligning for this equality and freedom and justice for all. So let's affirm that we fight for racial justice and making sure it extends beyond across the borders, that being what people use the word progressive is thrown around too frequently, but making sure that it is inclusive of the Palestinian people. Nelson Mandela once stated, "We know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians." While he was celebrated across the world, and we had US officials fighting to go to his funeral, even Israelis, let's not forget he was banned into coming into this country, was on the terrorist watch list. After years, so this work is hard. It is bone chilling. It's lonely, it's isolating. But when they try to divide our collective power, that is when we fail. It's important now more than ever with deplatforming repression campaigns is to push back, because when we forfeit our values on justice and freedom for all people, inclusive of the Palestinian people, that is when we are helping advance the work of fascists. We can't exceptionalize this plight to unconditional freedom. I welcome you all to this webinar. I welcome you all back to this space. In light of launching our resistance campaign at the Alliance for Global Justice, we aren't here to shy away from the work. So if you haven't signed our statement, you can check out our link tree. We'll share it in the chat. We already have close to 100 signatories. We're asking folks to share it. We're asking folks to donate like it hurts, because we understand that power comes with organized people and organized money. While they're coming for our credit card companies, we can write a check. This is the time to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people. This is the time to stand with pro-Palestinian organizations. So we're asking folks to write a check. Write a check. You can find we'll share that information, because we will show them, we are showing them that you can continuously try and attempt to deplatform, try and attempt to redirect our resources, our energy, and our focus, but we are still here. So we need you all to show up in the form of solidarity by making a contribution, signing our statement, sharing our statement, sharing this webinar, being in solidarity with Sami Dune, inviting Sami Dune, inviting AFGJ, inviting BAP to your spaces, having them speak with your networks, your base. We're asking folks we're going to be releasing our statement on Instagram and Twitter to share it. We have a social media toolkit. We will resist to exist. And with that being said, we're going to be moving into our preliminary session. All right, I have so many Google Docs opened up right now. All right, so we're going to be opening it up with a question for all our panelists. Please welcome back Erica Keynes from BAP, Charlotte Cates from Sami Dune, and Camille Landry from AFGJ. If we can get them on the screen real quick. Nice, beautiful people. So the first question to our panelists is, considering the ways in which we've heard Tanya speak about, which imprisoned imperialism fuels, neocolonialism, and these policies in these countries, how would you describe these new and old tactics and how these tactics continue to strengthen the state apparatus, whether it's the use of laws, as we see, the financial laws, anti-BDS laws, the criminalization of 60 indicted activists in Atlanta on stopping Cop City, how it works here in the US and in Palestine. We're gonna start off with Charlotte Cates from Sami Dune.
Thank you so much for this question. Thank you to AFTJ for organizing this, and of course for Black Alliance for Peace for always being in the leadership of movements for justice, both on this land and around the world. I have a short time to address this question, but I want to talk about two things in particular and how they connect to one another. And the first of those is the idea of what we call economic sanctions or unilateral coercive measures, because one of the most powerful, and it very much relates to what we're seeing happening right now with AFGJ and with Sami Dune, which is that not every imperialist venture takes place in the form of sending the troops, sending the military, conducting an air raid, bombing people. Instead, there's another policy which is happening at the same time, but is just as effective and perhaps even more devastating at seizing the resources and confiscating the sovereign wealth of peoples and nations around the world who are confronting and resisting imperialism. So that's why right now, from Venezuela to Zimbabwe to Eritrea to Cuba, and of course to Palestine, and particularly to Gaza under siege, what we see is the use of sanctions, blockades, and coercive economic measures as an attempt to keep peoples and nations under imperialism, under the jackboot of the United States, to have people's resources forcibly expropriated to benefit US, Canadian, and European multinational corporations at the expense of the people. Now, of course, sanctions also serve another purpose, and that purpose is regime change. So the purpose is also to prevent people from engaging in political projects that contest imperialism, that confront it, that build socialism. So when we look at the creation of things like both at a national level, like the specially designated global terrorist list, so-called, where funds are frozen for belonging to organizations, or if we look at kind of this semi-state lawfare being conducted by Zionist organizations right now to attempt to prevent not only Palestinian organizations on the ground in Palestine, not only resistance organizations that are directly confronting the occupation on a daily basis, but in fact, grassroots organizers, mobilizers, people doing solidarity work, Palestinians who have been expelled from their homeland for the past 75 years and denied the right to return home. That sanctions and so-called anti-terrorism laws, so-called over-enforcement, that's when banks and credit card companies decide it's too much trouble to deal with progressive and revolutionary organizations, and so they might as well be part of the capitalist system that they're very much a part of and just deplatform those organizers. That all of these are kind of on that continuum of the same sanctions that we see targeting Cuba, that we see targeting Venezuela, that we see targeting Eritrea, that we see targeting Zimbabwe, that have caused so much devastation in Haiti and Iraq, in Syria and Iran. This is the same policy of imperialist confiscation of wealth. And, you know, they say like starving the terrorists. Well, it's also a form, it's an attempt to starve resistance. So this is part of the same policy that is prison imperialism, that is the incarceration of 1 million Palestinians since the Nakba in 1948, that is the ongoing imprisonment today of 5,200 Palestinian political prisoners, 1,200 of which are in administrative detention, that's being jailed without charge or trial. And when we see these forces today, when we talk about the old and new forces of fascism, it's important to note that the Israeli regime, backed up as it is as a force of US imperialism, sees itself as a global vendor of surveillance technology and military tactics that have been blood and battle tested on Palestinian, Lebanese, and Syrian bodies. And that's a joint project with the United States and with its partners.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. You'll be hearing more from Charlotte in just a bit. With that, I'm going to be welcoming Camille from AFGJ back to the stage.
Sorry, people. Hello, thank you for this opportunity to talk about these very important issues. There are few greater obstacles to true democracy and to justice and fairness than mass incarceration. 124 million people in the United States alone have been stopped by police at least once in the last 5 years. Okay, that is a population larger than many nations. There are 6.7 million people currently, right now today, either in prison, on probation, or on parole in some form of court-ordered supervision. This is more people than the population of El Salvador or Norway or the Congo or Finland. Okay. The impact of this mass incarceration on people is overwhelming. And most importantly, it serves to preserve the status quo and prevent the people who are targeted by mass incarceration from being political actors. And I just don't mean in terms of electoral politics. It robs communities of wealth. It robs communities of opportunities to be educated. It robs communities of good health. It robs children of parents. It robs grandchildren who are caring for the children of incarcerated people of the ability to live a comfortable old age. It destroys our communities, and it threatens people from speaking up against injustice when they see it. The threat of incarceration is a major depressor of free speech. It's important to understand that the criminal justice system is neither as simple nor as just as it's depicted on TV. And most of what most people know about the justice system is what they see on shows like Law and Order and The Rookie. You see well-meaning people who only want to keep communities safe and see fairness and safety and protection. Nothing could be farther from the truth. The criminal justice system is shaped by the same political forces that distort and corrupt every other area of government policy and action. The influence of special interest money in elections, the lobbying of our elected officials by corporations, the power of corporations compared to that of the people, and partisan disputes over voting rights and redistricting, and other abuses of power and ethical breaches. You can't turn on TV or pick up a newspaper without seeing evidence of ethical breaches by members of the government, by corporations, and by the powerful. All of these breaches of good faith, of democracy, roll down upon the heads of the poorest and the least powerful communities, which happen to be BIPOC people, which happen to be people without economic means. And mass incarceration makes certain that they will not have the means to rise above these situations and do anything about it. Between the mid-70s and now, America's incarcerated population, which is about 250,000 people in the mid-70s, exploded to 2.3 million people, the most people in the world. That's a 700+% increase, while the nation's population only rose about 49% and change. So, and this is in spite of the fact that violent crime in the United States decreased by 51% and property crime decreased by about 43%. So there's no solid reason for this kind of mass incarceration. It's political. And at the moment, more people are incarcerated in the United States than were enslaved in the antebellum South prior to the Civil War. So if you have any doubts about the nature of incarceration and the effects it has on communities, consider the effects of slavery, of removing people from the body politic, and compare them to modern day Jim Crow and modern day slavery in the form of mass incarceration. The system is so broken that there is no fixing it, and the only answer is abolition. Sometimes you just have to tear it down and create something that is more just. It doesn't affect all communities equally. Black men without high school diplomas are 3 times more likely to be in prison than white men of the same education level. And though people in the United States of all ethnic groups use and sell illegal drugs at roughly similar rates, Black men are 2.7 times more likely to be arrested and 6.7 times more likely to be incarcerated after their arrest compared to whites. Blacks also receive harsher sentences than whites when you even controlling for the seriousness of the offense and the criminal history of the offender. There are few aspects of US society that are more racist than mass incarceration. Why is it tolerated? Why is it tolerated by people unless racism and racial oppression is the goal of this system? That's a question for you to ask yourselves. That is a question for you to ask elected officials. That is a question for us to stand in the streets and demand an answer to. The US so-called justice system is broken and cannot be fixed. The only valid response, the only logical response is abolition of the system. If you build a house and the house is leaning 45 degrees and about to topple over and is causing massive pain, massive loss of wealth, education, health, and political ability to participate in the society, there's no solution other than to tear it down. Abolish prisons and the carceral system now.
Woo! Thank you so much, Camille. Perfect transition. Let's welcome Erica Keynes from BAP.
Hi, everyone. So Charlotte talked about sanctions, but I want to talk about another set of soft power tools. Institutions like National Endowment for Democracy, which is NED, and United States Agency for International Development, which is the USAID. I want to broaden how we understand these tools of imperialism that serve to imprison our people. So as tools of US hegemony, these institutions have served to topple liberation struggles and non-capitalist people struggles, non-capitalist people-centered human rights struggles in those states in servitude of US full spectrum domination. So these institutions instigate students and youth into taking particular stances and positions against left-wing governments and potential color revolutions. So NED, which is a private nonprofit foundation dedicated to the growth and strengthening of democratic institutions around the world, it began under the Reagan administration solution to the storm of negative publicity following the Church Committee. So established in 1983, NED's initial use was undermining Eastern European governments in the name of democracy and freedom of speech. But once the Soviet Union fell, NED's purpose changed and it shifted in direction to projecting US government interests everywhere. So some current examples that we can cite was Nicaragua in 2018, in 2014, the Maidan protests in Ukraine, in 2019, Hong Kong, and then 2021, most recently in Cuba. And the USAID funds NED. It's used to advance U.S. national security, economic prosperity, providing leadership training for preferred, quote unquote, political candidates worldwide. So although the claim is as a human rights organization, the funds are allocated back to opposition insurrections, pushing for regime change globally. And the co-founder of NED, mentioned in the Washington Post in 1991, Alan Weinstein says, quote, "A lot of what we do today was done covertly 25 years ago by CIA," unquote. So NED and USAID are two examples, but not the only imperial tactics the U.S. has been using to continue to subject the globe to. And as such, they have served to confuse how we understand the questions of state, abolition, and who and what is a political prisoner. They have blurred the lines in between all of these connecting issues so that we do not understand how to fight against these systems. So I just wanted to offer that because I know that I have limited time. So thank you.
No, thank you. We're actually going to start our next portion with you. So stay here with me. Erica, thank you so much. Thank you for all that you do and the work that you do. Can you speak to us a little bit about, or a lot about, the facts and impacts, whether that's historically and now, how these assaults on human rights, including how mass incarceration, like we've been talking all night, is used to repress and controls and groups of people who challenge the status quo, who are demanding their freedom?
Yeah, so according to the prison policy, 1.9 million people are incarcerated in the US, with 803,000 people on parole and a staggering 2.9 million people on probation. And here where I reside in Maryland, where they are proposing a $330 million police training facility, a cop city, on Coppin State University's campus, which is an HBCU that already has access to the Department of Defense's 1033 program. Maryland has an incarceration rate of 531 per 100,000 people. And this includes prisons, jails, immigration detention centers, and juvenile justice facilities. And what this means is that it locks up a higher percentage of its people than almost any democracy on earth. And Baltimore City, more specifically, where they are proposing to put the cop city, is home to only 9% of the state's residents, but home to 40% of the state's incarcerated population. And while the United States has a dubious distinction of having the highest incarceration rate in the world, because of US hegemony, it has outsourced many of these inhuman carceral practices. And this is why BAP is clear that global and domestic imperialism are counterparts. And I'm glad that Tanya centered us in the beginning with an understanding of imperialism, because understanding prison imperialism means understanding imperialism, as mentioned earlier, as the highest stage of capitalism and what that entails. So simply put, capitalism leaving the borders of the US through the mechanism of financial penetration, acquisition of markets in other countries, and the use of the gun in the hands of armed forces of the state to smash liberation struggles wherever they might occur, because those liberation struggles are fundamentally heading towards, or away from, rather, capitalist systems, therefore ultimately opposing the continued existence of capitalist rule and neoliberal dominance over the world. So in this way, prisons are dictated by Western influence and power and must be understood as the extension of militarized policing, which is a manifestation of fascist settler origins of the US. So if we understand the US as a settler colonial project and fascism as an ideology outsourced from the colonies into the falsehood of this democracy in the West, then we can understand the expansion of Western hegemony to maintain full spectrum dominance only has one plausible conclusion, and that is a replication of its systems. And speaking out against this interconnecting system, especially taking an internationalist stance, pushing back against the maintaining of the system not only criminalizes activists, as we are witnessing currently with the African People's Socialist Party, and organizers fighting the effects of austerity policies and neoliberalism here, leading to more occupation like cop cities popping up all over, thus continuing decades-long trail of political prisoners here in the US, like Mumia Abu-Jamal, like Amin Jamil Al-Amin, like Reverend Joy Powell, and also abroad, like those fighting for the sovereignty of their lands. So I would conclude by saying, free them all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up, sorry, I'm trying to do the spotlight. We have Camille Landry. Camille, welcome back.
Thank you. You'd think after all the time we spent on Zoom in the last couple of years, I'd be able to unmute myself on time. Apologies.
You see the chat blowing up right now that y'all are doing amazing. So I want to get into your question, as we've promised folks a deeper dive. Camille, as we know, the existence of a police state where BIPOC people live also serves to increase the wealth gap between whites and BIPOC people. Can you speak to its impact on education, housing, employment, healthcare? The list goes on. So even participation in the democratic process.
Okay. First of all, let me repeat that mass incarceration in the United States and elsewhere where prison imperialism has taken place is a crime against humanity, pure and simple. It disproportionately ruins the lives of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. It wastes human potential. It destabilizes neighborhoods. It destroys communities. And we all pay dearly for it in both human and economic terms. At its roots, it's as practiced by the United States, it is one of the most egregious abuses of human rights since chattel slavery and the apartheid of Jim Crow, by the way, which has been exported to Palestine and many other places. Prison systems account for about 1 out of every 15 discretionary dollars in states' general budgets. That's an average. I live in Oklahoma, where that number is closer to about 22% of the state budget. Criminal justice is the second fastest growing category of state budgets, behind only Medicaid, and 90% of that spending goes to prisons. So these are trillions of dollars that are not being spent on feeding people, housing people, educating our children and youth, caring for senior citizens, providing health care, universal health care for the population. The United States remains the only industrialized nation that lacks universal health care. Furthermore, it just simply doesn't work. If you are Black, if you are brown, if you are indigenous in the United States, jail and prisons are traps that are targeted at you, just waiting to spring shut. You have a really high likelihood of being incarcerated. In the zip code in which I live, the public schools say that about 84% of the children in attendance at public schools in my zip code have a parent who is or has been incarcerated. Consider the cost of this, both in dollars and in human misery. It's really brutal. Class, as well as race, is a factor in incarceration, but class isn't as significant a predictor of incarceration as race is. In other words, race trumps it all. In fact, a middle-class Black man or woman, somebody who comes from a family of average or above average means, is still far more likely to be arrested and incarcerated than a white person with poverty level wages. Black men raised in the top 1% of income are as likely to be as incarcerated as white men raised in households earning about $30,000. That's according to the New York Times. Race is the issue. When you look at the effects of this, you're talking about something that covers all aspects of US society. It has a heavy negative impact in both monetary and social terms on the people who are incarcerated and their families. It removes young adults from their families and from their communities at a critical time in their lives where they should be pursuing training, education, careers, starting families, and finding their places in the world. It literally puts these men and women on ice. They are locked up and locked out of society. And when they're released, they have requirements such as paying court costs and restitution, the failure of which to pay can land you right back in jail, revoke your parole, and further taking wealth out of the communities. Being locked up costs money. It costs money to the people who are locked up. Aside from having to pay for lawyers and defense and that kind of thing. Prisons actually have as a line item in their budget in most states the telephone system, where it costs maybe 10 to 15 times more to make a telephone call from prison than it would for anybody else to make a phone call. So staying in touch with your loved ones is a cost that many of the families of incarcerated people have to bear. It is necessary to supplement people's prisons experiences, if you can call it that, with money from home. Feminine hygiene products are not routinely provided to women who are incarcerated. Deodorant, soap, shampoo, other basic kinds of things that let people live a life of basic human dignity are frequently not required or are so heavily rationed. The food in prison is abysmal. Many people come out of prison finding themselves diabetic, obese, with high blood pressure, and other diseases that are directly related to the poor food that they are fed. And even the number of calories that they are provided during the day are fewer than the number of calories that are generally accepted by the medical community as necessary for a man or a woman, an adult man or a woman. So these people are literally having their brains stunted, their bodies stunted by being starved, by borderline starvation. When they get out, finding a job is nearly impossible because being hired with a felony conviction is something that just doesn't happen. And in many states, people with felony convictions are prevented from holding any kind of state license. That includes being a barber, a hairdresser, a building inspector, an undertaker, many healthcare professions, and more. So this makes it very difficult for formerly incarcerated people to re-enter society and to stay out of jail. In the beginning, when the only real income generating endeavor in your community is slinging drugs, what choices do you have when your choice is between working at Burger King for minimum wage on a part-time job, by the way, with no health insurance, you know, which is directly tied to employment in the United States. So the post-incarceration unemployment rates compared to the general population is like 37.5% for Black women and over 55% for Black men. Latinx people fall someplace in the middle. So the impacts on children are huge too. 1 out of every 12 US children, which is about 6 million kids under the age of 18, have experienced parental incarceration. That is also a leading cause of children ending up in the US foster care system, which is a peculiar and particular form of torture and hell. I'm not being hyperbolic when I talked about, when I call it exactly that. Children die in foster care. Children see their lives put on hold and destroyed for the mere crime of being a child whose parent has been incarcerated. The impacts on families are huge. Deaths and serious injuries in prisons are extremely common. And I'm not just talking about, you know, because of violence. I'm talking about prisoners are often forced. We're talking slavery, a true form of slavery, where you are forced to do jobs like cleaning up highways or building furniture for the state government, or carrying out all sorts of fighting forest fires, a really dangerous endeavor, where people who are imprisoned are forced to do this. And then when they get out, the health impacts are huge because employment is tied, health insurance is tied to employment. So if you can't get the kind of job that comes with the health insurance policy, then you become one of the millions of people in the United States who are going to die younger than they should have and live miserable lives suffering from preventable diseases because of your lack of health insurance.
Thanks
The
so
corona
much, Neil.
have I hit my time limit?
Yes, we're actually at 8 o'clock hour. We want to make sure we get Charlotte's question in. Thank you. That is, you know, we didn't want to interrupt you because all of it is so important. Thank you so much. Charlotte,
Abolish it.
welcome back. Charlotte, we'll jump right into it. It's way too often. We've talked about it on this webinar before, the whole resistance campaign. Talk to us about how these groups, these Zionist groups, continue to attempt, and they're perfecting their propaganda and deflection tactics by falsely accusing pro-human rights groups like Samidun of terrorism allegations and designations. We see it with how they target these movements, like from Stop Cop City and of course to Palestine. What's the best advice you could offer organizations and activists on how to balance shutting down these outlandish accusations, if it's interfering with operations, of course, without redirecting too much of the org's time, energy, and work?
A really great question, because when we think about the purpose of these allegations, why they exist, there's two reasons. One of them is direct, it's obvious, to cut off resources, because the reality is that in the society that we live in, if our organizations don't have money, they can't print a poster. They can't print a postcard. They can't print stickers. They can't travel and speak. They can't do work. They can't organize because people need resources in order to organize. So what they want to do is they want to cut off the flow of resources to organizations. And it's even those who are the most vulnerable to this, of course, are those who have the least resources. So if you have an organization that's dependent on $5 and $10 and $15 donations from grassroots supporters, this is the organization that's going to be the most heavily impacted by this kind of deplatforming campaign, by making it more and more difficult to donate. And it makes it, kind of more difficult, particularly for people who are making small donations. So this is one goal. But the second goal is to make us stop talking about the purpose of our work and instead start talking about Zionist organizations and how we need to defend ourselves from them, or even worse, to change our politics and become defensive. So that instead of saying we need to shut down Cop City, we need to free all the political prisoners, Palestinian resistance is legitimate, just, and organizing for the liberation of not just Palestinians, but for all people around the world. That instead of saying that we will begin to say, no, we don't want to change the system. We're just trying to change a few things. We want some minor reforms, because if we are remolded into a new version of our organizing, then they've won another victory. They've won the victory in that we are not defining what the cause is. The Palestinians on the ground are not defining what the cause is. Those people who are fighting in prison are not defining what the cause is. Instead, Zionist organizations, the imperialist powers responsible for those crimes, are the ones defining what is a legitimate voice for the cause. So the best way that we can fight back is essentially and fundamentally to double down on our positions, on our perspectives, to double down on our commitment to uphold those who are struggling and suffering the most as a result of imperialism, as a result of colonialism, as a result of Zionism. In Palestine, that means standing with the Palestinian political prisoners, all 5,200 of them. This includes the 12-year-old children. This includes the administrative detainees locked in prison for no reason and no charge for years on end. And it also includes the resistance fighters who are serving 60 life sentences inside occupation prisons, to stand with all Palestinian prisoners because they are all in prison for resisting, organizing, and leading the struggle for the liberation of Palestine. And because Palestine is so central to the imperialist project, that means that these are the leaders of our global social justice and liberation movement. Now, they're not alone, of course, in that they stand alongside Mumia Abu Jamal, Imam Jamil Al-Amin, all of the prisoners of the Black Liberation Movement, Leonard Peltier, the political prisoners locked in US jails. Now, we know that this is a continuum. We see this financial repression that's taking place and these kinds of attacks. And we should know that these are state-backed attacks. These are backed by the Zionist regime, and their embassies carried out working together with Zionist and right-wing and fascist organizations around the world in order to shut down any voice that speaks for the liberation of Palestine and that speaks for the defeat of imperialism, the defeat of capitalism, the defeat of Zionism, and the liberation of all peoples. What they want us to do is narrow our horizon so that we are struggling just to survive. They want to narrow the horizons of people who are fighting for socialism and building it in Cuba and Venezuela. They want to narrow the horizon of the Black liberation movement, and so they lock up its leaders and put them behind bars. They want to narrow the horizon of the Palestinian people, and so they put a siege on Gaza and build a wall, and they engage in daily ethnic cleansing and destruction, and they engage in mass incarceration, and they persecute resistance organizations, but also human rights activists, organizers. I mean, let's face it, the Zionist president declared that Ben & Jerry's not selling ice cream to occupation settlements, illegal settlements in the West Bank, was a form of terrorism. So if this is what the definition of terrorism is, if we see in Atlanta right now that the definition of domestic terrorism is going to a concert or paying for some food for an activist training, then what does this mean? Well, then if we are all terrorists, then the answer is clear. We've got to shut down this entire system of terrorist lists, terrorist designations, because what these are is nothing more than a mechanism for criminalizing liberation struggle, while those who perpetrate the terror upon the people of the world are raking in the profits and continuing their policies of destruction. They want to narrow our horizons, and so our response has to be to expand them, but it also has to be to stand with all of the people who are fighting repression, to liberate all of the political prisoners from occupation jails, from US jails, from French jails, from Dutch jails, from all of the imperialist, Zionist, and reactionary regime prisons that hold them. And it also means that we have to stand with and speak up for our comrades who are facing repression, from the 61 defendants in Atlanta to Zaid Abdel Nasser, the coordinator of Sami Dune, Germany, who is being threatened with having his residency as a Palestinian refugee stripped because of organizing protests and demonstrations for Palestine. When we stand together, we can build an alliance. They have their security coordination alliances, but we can have a people's alliance that fights back and that is, in fact, when we center those who are struggling and fighting, from the reservations and the oppressed communities on this land to the people in occupied Palestine, to the people in Cuba and Venezuela and Eritrea and Zimbabwe and Syria and Iran and Haiti who are fighting for a new world, we can win and they can lose.
Woo! Thank you so much, Charlotte. As you can see in the chat, everyone, fire emojis. Thank you so much. I'm going to add the panelists just so we are good on time. Camille, when you turn your camera on, I will add you. So let's get into it. There's 2 questions. Let's see. There's Camille. Great. It says, given the nature of white supremacy, imperialism, racial capitalism, whatever you want to all of it, and the need to end these systems of injustice, what is it going to take for people power movements in the US, from Black leftists to eco-socialists to anti-imperialists and the workers' rights movements and Latinx leftists to show more urgency, more urgent solidarity to the plight of Indigenous, Hawaiian, Alaskans, and help dismantle the settler colonial project that they are still brutally subjected to? I don't want to put anyone in on the spot, but Erica, I know you have to head out if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I think simply I would just say organize, right? But how we organize through the principles of unity and a points of unity and understanding clearly where we unite in this struggle. But I also think to wake up people up and to organize a mass of people means to politically educate the people. So forums like this that exposes the contradictions of prison imperialism in ways that people might not have been informed about, naming the names, saying the things that people are not normally hearing is important. So I would just suggest that we organize in terms of trying to politically educate the people around our conditions, especially in terms of our colonial situation. For me personally, the way that I do it is through a eternal colonialism framework here, and making sure that people, and emphasizing the fact that we are colonized here within the US, but then more specifically, like I said, that really holds the line that domestic and global imperialism are counterparts. So just drawing those connections, just like how we've done today between Palestine and Cop City, and not only just Palestine and Cop City, but how Charlotte was able to elevate that conversation on a more global scale, including Iran, including Nicaragua, including Syria, including Eritrea, and understanding those connections that connect us in our circumstances, understanding, seeing the narrative of rising crime here to not be anything dissimilar to the gang rise in Haiti, and what that leads to, more occupation either on our streets or in that country, and then understanding who and what the classes and the class character behind what our repression looks like. So all of that, I think, is emphasized in forums like this with an emphasis on political education. So I'd like to thank you all. But I'm a mom, it's bedtime, so I have to go. But I do appreciate having this space to share these ideas with you all. And until next time.
Thank you so much, Erica. Tanya, do you want to jump in, answer the question too?
I mean, I would just say the same thing Erica said, organizing and making the connections between, the struggles going on here and the struggles going on internationally. It's all rooted again in the same thing, which is imperialism, as I said. So yeah, that's what I would say, organize and creating alternative media like this, as we're doing, to really share those ideas. Those visionary ideas, those socialist ideas, anti-imperialist ideas. And so, yeah, we need to be creating our own media.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question. And this question, Camille, you can answer first, and then Charlotte, and of course, Tanya. How can we mobilize international solidarity to the people of Haiti? Many Latin American heads of states who are left-wing, the Caribbean island nations and across Africa engage in bullying Haiti. And there doesn't seem to be much orchestrated solidarity for Haiti, unlike Cuba, Palestine, and Venezuela.
I think it's absolutely true that Haiti gets the short end of that stick. And that is something that has been happening ever since the Haitian people demanded that they would no longer be chattel slaves for the benefit of their colonial masters. And they've been made to pay for literally hundreds of years for the crime of wanting to be full-fledged human beings in this hemisphere. So first off is recognizing that fact and recognizing the incredible injustice of the way that Haiti is being treated. And also to understand that US hegemony takes the form of taking their client states. So right now we've got Kenya sending troops to Haiti. What sense does this make for the Kenyan people to come down on the side of the United States and France against the people who look like them on the island of Haiti? But this is the nature of oppression. This is the nature of neocolonialism. This is the nature of neoliberalism. So first out, you have to educate, you have to activate, you have to organize. Relative to the question before about indigenous communities, it's the same kind of issue. We have kind of the poster children of any given moment, and we don't seem to be able to uphold and to work on a broad series of issues, but without understanding the relationships between oppression in Haiti and oppression in Palestine and oppression in the Congo and oppression in Niger and the proxy war in Ukraine. Let's talk about the 500-pound gorilla in this room, my people. Without understanding the threads that tie these together, we have no hope of being able to defeat them. So I also want to say very briefly that although political organizing on the left is vitally important, it is also important to step into the public political realm when necessary. Issues of tribal sovereignty are under debate in courthouses around the country. Add your voice to the voices of the people. Issues of foreign policy are under debate in the US Congress and the US Senate. Even though I don't believe that we are going to gain freedom and liberation based on electoral politics, they do have a role. Silence is capitulation to injustice. Open your mouth.
Thank you so much, Camille. Charlotte.
This is a really important question. I agree with everything that Camille has already said, but just to say, I mean, and to reiterate, which is, Haiti has probably been sanctioned for longer and more than any other country in the world. So when we talk about sanctions, unilateral coercive measures, these are sanctions that were imposed by France upon Haiti, but France is still collecting and stealing money from the people of Haiti on an annual basis. French colonialism isn't just some artifact of over 200 years ago. This is a reality every day that when we're looking at this attempt to once again send military forces into Haiti to occupy the Haitian people's land, to extract their wealth and resources, to extract their labor, we are still seeing colonialism and neocolonialism in action from the United States and from France and from their partners. Now, one thing we know is that imperialist powers always rely upon conscripting reactionary regimes around the world that represent the interests of only the most narrow sector of the ruling class of that country, and not of the people of that country. The people of Kenya have no interest in occupying Haiti. The people of Kenya, I mean, in fact, the Communist Party of Kenya has been fighting against severe repression, especially recently. There have been a number of people who were killed, imprisoned, and injured in protests and demonstrations for political justice in Kenya. So this is the same government that's aligned with the US on anti-communism that's talking about sending troops to Haiti as well. Now, of course, this question is more complicated in Latin America because we have seen real contradictions in the approach of progressive revolutionary governments to Haiti. And it's so important, I think, to reach out in a sense of comradeship and solidarity to talk about and to make this a real issue so that it's not okay to participate in ongoing military intervention in Haiti. And that even if a Haitian voice is put forward to justify the participation, because that's the way that it works, right? It wouldn't work if imperialism didn't put forward a local voice to say, oh, we want imperialist intervention. That's why we saw Juan Guaido in Venezuela. Juan Guaido was a pretext for a coup, and it failed. And this strategy can also fail in Haiti, but it definitely means that those of us who are part of liberation movements, progressive movements, particularly those of us in the United States, that just like in 2004, when the US was directly responsible for the coup in Haiti, overthrowing elected President Jean-Bertrand Aristide, that we can't be silent anymore. We can't just let it happen. We can't go along with the idea that, like Erica was talking about earlier in terms of the way in which consent is manufactured for occupation, for colonization, for intervention. We cannot allow this to happen one more time with Haiti. And we have a responsibility to the people of Haiti to stand and to organize and to make sure that, just like we say that our movement for Palestine is not complete unless we're talking about and building meaningful alliances with Black liberation, with Indigenous liberation on this land, well, it also cannot be complete without the liberation of Haiti from imperialism. And it's our responsibility in our movement to do everything that we can to move that forward and to reject any form of US imperialism or proxy imperialism and intervention in Haiti, and to take to the streets and do what needs to be done to stand with the people of Haiti and fight imperialism.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Tanya, I just want to give you an opportunity to also respond.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to add. I think Charlotte pretty much nailed it. So yeah, I don't have much more to add to that.
All right, y'all, this concludes webinar 2. Thank you to Sami Dune. Thank you to BAP. Thank you, of course, to AFGJ, our panelists, our presenters, and all of you who have joined. This is available on our YouTube. Share it widely. I know that Charlotte shared their People's Forum event coming up. Check it out. Share our statement. Thank you all for joining. And don't forget to check out our social media toolkit to be in solidarity with us, uplift our statement and our Twitter or X, whatever it is. And be sure to get, if you're able to donate what you can, get your friends to write a check as well. Thank you. And this concludes webinar 2 from Cop City to Palestine.